withhold premature judgments. It's important that we determine who the perpetrator was, but it's also important that we get it right. You may remember after Oklahoma City, the first assumption was that it was an Islamic group. It turned out to be a United States militia group. We're going to respond, as the president said tonight, very forcefully against whoever we determine to have committed this horrendous act. So we need to be sure that we are responding against the right person or the right supporting state.
Senator, there have been any number of terrorism experts on the air tonight and throughout this day who are saying, well, we shouldn't be surprised by the fact that there was a terrorist attack. We've all been expecting that, although most of them were stunned by the complexity and the magnitude of it all. But have we turned a deaf ear to all these warnings about how vulnerable America is to terrorism?
I don't think we've turned a deaf ear, but we have been allowing our front line of protection against terrorism, which is our intelligence services, to gradually degrade. We have not been maintaining our capacity to eavesdrop on terrorist groups in the same way that we did for 30 or 40 years against the Soviet Union. We have not made the investment in human intelligence, particularly people with the diversity of backgrounds, language skills, and technical skills to effectively get inside these terrorist cells and determine what their capability and motivations might be. And we are collecting a substantially greater volume of information than we are able to adequately analyze and therefore use for intelligence purposes. We need to shore up all those areas of weakness in our intelligence system.
Finally, Senator, this is a terrible wake-up call for this country. Will there be a redistribution of resources, in your judgment, to beef up the war against terrorists around the world in terms of military personnel and political efforts that will be made?
Yes. For some time, people who have made these assessments have almost universally established that our two major threats to national security were the 7,000 nuclear warheads still in the possession of the Russians and terrorism. I don't think we've been applying adequate priority to that terrorism threat. This will be a wake-up call. It's a terrible thing that it took such a loss of life and a shock to the American people to do so. But I think as we look back from some perspective of history, September the 11th, 2001 will be the turning of a page in the history of America, and in this new chapters that we're about to write, we'll be putting the kind of importance and resources behind the challenge of terrorism that the threat deserves.
Thank you very much, Senator Bob Graham, who is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrat from the state of Florida. We're joined now by one of the most highly regarded terrorism experts in America, Brian Jenkins, a veteran of Vietnam. We heard earlier today one of the firefighters in New York saying, I was in combat for a year. I've never seen anything like this. As you look at these scenes, is there any doubt in your mind that we are in a state of war with terrorism, Mr. Jenkins?
No, I don't think there's any question about it. The scale of the incident is unprecedented in the annals of terrorism, and indeed we have to go back. I think even I'm not even sure the metaphor of Pearl Harbor, which has been used frequently today, is adequate. At Pearl Harbor, there were approximately 2,400 casualties. It's entirely possible that we will see, I hope not, but it's possible that we will see those figures surpassed today. This brings to mind the images that one saw of the Blitz in London, of the cities in Europe during World War II.
But in those cases, both Pearl Harbor and the Blitz, we knew who the enemy was. And in this case, They hijack civilian airliners, use innocent civilians as weapons against other innocent civilians, and we don't know who they are. So it is a whole new form of warfare for a new century.
It is completely different, and we're not going to have in this type of warfare the satisfaction of landings at Normandy Beach or anybody coming out on the decks of a battleship to ultimately sign a surrender. And that is going to create inevitably some frustration between, on the one hand, the anger that this incident will create. Right now, the American people are stunned, they're frightened, they're alarmed, and that's understandable, but that will very quickly congeal to anger as we fully comprehend the cost, the carnage of today's attacks. There's going to be frustration between that and our ability to achieve what will be seen as victories in this war against terrorism. You know, Tom, I think people don't understand that the war goes on constantly. There are constant reports, intelligence reports, threats, warnings that we react to. We react to them by issuing alerts, in some cases by increasing security at a particular location, in some cases by evacuating an embassy. And those actions, in some cases, thwart the terrorist plans. But those victories are invisible. We can't count things that don't occur. What we see are the failures of intelligence, the failures of security, as we see here today.
Brian Jenkins, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We now have some more details about what was going on these airliners. Cell phones are ubiquitous in American life, including on these planes as they were being hijacked. There are a number of both instructive and poignant stories that we're hearing. One man and his wife and his child were on a flight. They called his father twice to say that the stewardess had been stabbed, and called a second time to say that the plane was going down. The man was identified as a former Easton, Connecticut resident, Peter Hansen. A minister confirmed the cell phone call to his father, Lee Hansen, an official in Easton, a small town which is near Bridgeport on the coast. He called to his parents' home, and so in that way they were together at that moment, according to the Reverend Bonnie Bardot, as she was describing what transpired between this young man and his family on the plane before it went down. Another flight attendant on one of the American Airlines flights managed to call an emergency number as the flight was being hijacked, and she said that one of her fellow attendants had been stabbed. A San Francisco woman told KUTV in San Francisco, in that area, that her son, Mark Bingham, 31 years old, called her from aboard the United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania, saying, "We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb." That is Alice Hoagland quoting her son calling from the flight. This is what happened mid-morning today after the towers had been hit by the plane. They simply began to collapse. First tower number 2, which took the most severe hit, that's the one that had the huge fireball. The architect who designed these buildings later told NBC's George Lewis that the heat was so intense that the structural steel in a building like that will melt within 3 or 4 hours. Well, the heat was so intense it melted in a shorter time than that. Then the second one went down. These are 110 stories high. Many people were working in the building at the time. Some of them were trapped above what you see there. Others were below, still trying to get out. And of course, it's very hard to imagine that there could have been very many survivors in that kind of collapse of steel, concrete, electrical circuitry, and glass. It created a kind of tornado effect in the canyons of Manhattan. A number of the NBC News correspondents were trapped, many of them in grave danger, as well as a lot of rescue workers, obviously, and other people who were in that area. And there are reports that between 200 and 300 firemen are missing who were in there at the time trying to rescue personnel. We heard earlier in a report from Dawn Fratangelo about a woman who was coming out of the building. She said the firemen were going up and she just knows that they were lost. These are the people who were watching that at the time. Let's go to the White House now, and NBC's Campbell Brown, who is in Washington, at least, if not at the White House. And tomorrow morning, the President's Day will begin early after this long and arduous day in which he addressed the nation tonight, Campbell.
Well, Tom, he convened a national security meeting here this evening after his remarks. That meeting has now ended, but I can tell you there are many, many lights still burning here at the White House tonight. And aides do tell us he is expected to begin the day early tomorrow, again meeting first thing in the morning with his national security team. The focus now shifting to, number one, getting federal aid to the thousands of people who have been touched by these attacks, and number two, focusing now on finding out who is responsible. The president, in his remarks tonight, having some very strong words regarding punishment for the terrorists, as well as any country, in his words, who harbors them. The president also tonight talking about how the country has the strength to overcome this. And here was the president from earlier this evening.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night.
Now, Tom, aides who spent the day traveling with the president described his demeanor throughout the day as somber but very even-keeled, that he was never overly emotional. His security was obviously a top priority today, which is why we saw Air Force One hopscotching around the country. He began the day in Florida at an education event, and that was really the one time that we did see a sort of emotional reaction from the president when he was informed by his chief of staff, Andy Card, who whispered in his ear about the second plane crashing into the World Trade Center. We really did see a fairly strong reaction from the president at that time when it became clear that these were in fact terrorist attacks. He from there went to the Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, from there to the U.S. Strategic Command Center in Nebraska. And at each of these times, as Air Force One took off and landed, we were not told where it was going, and this was deliberate. The Secret Service has a plan that they have not implemented in some time, but this is a deliberate plan where they send the plane around the country without informing anyone exactly where it is going. The entire time, the president having F-15 air escorts on his wings, and Air Force One essentially turning into a flying White House. The president had communication with anyone around the world. He was fielding calls from world leaders. He spoke first with Vice President Cheney. He spoke twice with his wife, Laura Bush, who was also rushed to an undisclosed location. And again, Vice President Cheney, the person he was in contact with most today, Cheney was here at the White House in the Situation Room. And we are told that tomorrow morning we will likely get briefings in the morning from Secretary of State Colin Powell and FEMA Director Joe Alba. Tom.
Campbell Brown at the White House tonight, who's been on duty as well all day long. Campbell, I'm just going to share with you some information that we heard from Andrea Mitchell earlier. And now Orrin Hatch, who is the ranking Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee, says that he has been told that U.S. intelligence officials, we presume it's the National Security Agency, which runs the intercepts around the world, picked up some information that included people associated with bin Laden, who acknowledged a couple of targets were hit, but he would not be more specific. He also said law enforcement has data possibly linking one person on one of the 4 ill-fated flights to bin Laden's organization. We had been telling you earlier that FBI agents were on their way to what they thought was the former home of this man. When they entered his name in the FBI data bank, it did trigger some alarms from them. The home is either in Broward County or in Daytona Beach, which is just north of Miami, and of course you know where Daytona Beach is. It is now 12:02 Eastern Time. It is a new day. It is the 12th of September, but an old and terrible day will linger with us for an untold number of hours yet, perhaps days and weeks for that matter. The 11th of September, a day that will have a dark, dark mark in American history. We've asked Dateline Stone Phillips to take us through this day to tell us all that has happened. Here is his report.
Today, the unimaginable happened. At the start of a busy workday, New Yorkers heard an explosion, then looked up to see a symbol of America's economic power, one of the World Trade Center's twin towers billowing smoke and flames.
The glass just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Minutes later, literally from out of the blue, an even more horrifying sight. A jetliner bearing down on the other tower. It was a direct hit.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Before the hour was out, the symbol of American military power, the Pentagon, was also in flames. It too apparently the target of a new weapon, a passenger jet hijacked and turned into a guided missile. Across the country, shock, sorrow, fear, outrage, and the realization that America was under attack. About 8:45 this morning, the sky over Manhattan was clear following a night of violent thunderstorms. In the city's financial district, the very heart of American commerce, thousands of workers were already at their desks. Moments later, in the upper reaches of the 110-story North Tower, sudden impact.
As Matt just mentioned, we have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
1 second after the sound started, there was gray smoke and what looked to be like confetti flying all over the place.
Fire and death above, confusion below, as some 10,000 people streamed out of the building.
There was a lady had a big gash on her head, so it was people stampeding one over top of another.
Witnesses reported a horrifying scene. Desperate people jumping from the burning skyscraper. Bloody clothing and body parts scattered on the streets below. As emergency crews rushed to the southern tip of Manhattan, the immediate thought, could it really be happening again? In 1993, the same building was hit by a truck bomb, Islamic militants hoping to topple the one tower into the other. 6 people died in that attack, and 1,500 were injured. But within the first minutes today, it was clear that the toll this time would be much higher. Then, at 9:03, less than 20 minutes after the first strike, with police and rescue personnel still scrambling to respond, this.
There were many people in the building.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
Live cameras trained on the first stricken tower captured another huge explosion, this one on the South Tower. Only this time, the attack was documented. This indelible image to be replayed again and again, seared into the American memory.
And here it comes right there.
An American Airlines 767 with 92 people on board hijacked on its flight from Boston to Los Angeles, becoming the implement of mass murder. The impact was devastating, the airliner punching through the skin of the huge tower, another rain of glass, concrete, and terror.
It's like this unbelievable ball of fire, and the whole street, which is now awakened, everyone's like, whoa. People start crying, people start running.
It was now clear that this was no accident. The first tower had also been hit by a hijacked passenger jet, a United flight that had also taken off from Boston, bound for LA. The attacks left New York virtually paralyzed. Tunnels and bridges linking the city shut down, subways closed, telephone lines jammed, cell phones overloaded as frantic callers tried to contact loved ones. At 9:30, President Bush, in Florida to talk about education, addressed a nation reeling and in need of reassurance.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
But even as the president pledged to hunt down and punish those responsible, another attack, this one even more audacious. The target, the Pentagon. Another American Airlines jet bound for Los Angeles had been hijacked, this one taking off from Washington's Dulles Airport. It was another direct hit. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski suddenly found himself on the front lines of a war that had come home.
I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
9:43 a.m. With concern that the White House could be a target, President Bush boarded Air Force One bound for a special secure command post at a military base. At 9:49, the Federal Aviation Administration announced it was shutting down the nation's air traffic. In a world turned upside down, hundreds of passenger planes crisscrossing the country were now potential terrorist weapons.
The Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport.
This morning, on a scale beyond belief, Americans experienced what it's like to feel truly vulnerable, to realize when someone is willing to die for a cause, we are all potential targets. The number one suspect, this man, Osama bin Laden, a radical Islamic terrorist linked to past attacks on American interests. A London-based Arab journalist said today that 3 weeks ago, followers of bin Laden warned of a huge and unprecedented attack on the U.S. Was this it?
Somebody provided the logistical support for this operation, and clearly the only person, or one of the only people, that has built up such a network in the world today is Osama bin Laden.
There was no word from bin Laden, but the Taliban-ruled government of Afghanistan, where bin Laden is based, issued a statement this morning condemning the attacks and saying bin Laden did not have the capability to carry out such acts. And there were plenty of other suspects, ranging from radical Palestinian groups to rogue governments.
President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks.
While the nation's intelligence community ran down possible suspects and tried to assess whether more attacks were imminent, rescue workers in New York and Washington confronted a disaster of immense proportions. In New York, local hospitals began filling up, urgent calls going out to every available surgeon and nurse, long lines of people outside waiting to donate blood.
It was a war zone. Unbelievable.
And still, there was worse to come. At 9:59 a.m., the Trade Center's South Tower, the building that took the second hit, began to crumble. It was almost incomprehensible. In a matter of seconds, the skyscraper collapsed and was gone.
Suddenly, we hear, the security say, everyone get out now, everyone run for your life.
NBC producer Shahar Baran was there with a home video camera.
A bunch of women just standing there, shocked. By then, the whole building sort of implodes. It just goes like this. And you see like a side of the building, and then it goes, and there's this ball, this silver yellow ball sort of heading towards you, kind of in slow motion. You can't figure out what to do. People are starting to run like crazy.
Then, at 10 a.m., news of another passenger plane in trouble. Someone on United Airlines Flight 93, traveling from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, called 911 and reported a hijacking. Then, an explosion and silence. The plane crashed here, some 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. There were 45 people on board. So far, 3 passenger jets used kamikaze style, and a 4th that might have been. 266 people on board killed. The death toll on the ground still unclear. Then, at 10:30, another sickening sight. The tower still standing, following its twin, collapsing, vanishing in a cloud of smoke. By 11 o'clock, the sense of alarm had spread across the country. Troops standing guard as national landmarks were shut down. Fighter jets actually patrolling the skies as the last airborne passenger planes rushed to safety. 11:14, officials trying to manage the disaster, struggling to describe it all.
First of all, Chief, do we have any idea of how many people are in there?
We have no idea. Now, as you know, it was pretty much rush hour time that this took place this morning, so the numbers we don't know yet. We tried to get almost everybody out that we could early on. 10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day. And we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
And New Yorkers were struggling too.
And now they both collapsed. There's no more World Trade Centers.
At 11:42, another plane from Boston declared an emergency. Fearing a bomb on board, it landed in Cleveland. Soon, all planes in Canada as well as the U.S. were grounded. The borders with Mexico and Canada were sealed, and Major League Baseball announced the cancellation of all games scheduled for today. At 1:12, President Bush, at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, again spoke to the nation.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Moments after his speech, the president reboarded Air Force One for a then undisclosed location. Meanwhile, in New York, an army of rescue workers and volunteers from the city's building trades and other unions made their way to the wreckage of Lower Manhattan, seeking the injured and dead.
You guys going back?
Yes. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped. Not trying to be a hero, but I think if you were in this position, you'd do the same thing.
Those civilians who could made their way by foot across the Brooklyn Bridge, as New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani called for calm in a city that was more shell-shocked than terrified.
And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal.
The mayor's news conference gave the first hint of just how high the casualty count could be.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon.
Just before 3 p.m., President Bush landed at Offutt Air Force Base outside of Omaha. From an underground bunker at the Strategic Air Command Base, he convened a National Security Council briefing. As 4 o'clock approached, the president's spokesperson, Karen Hughes, briefed reporters back in Washington.
The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington.
5:21 p.m. Even as people around the country struggled with the enormity of today's events, a third building at the World Trade Center, damaged by this morning's attacks, collapsed.
They advised us to leave because we have... Oh, my God. Look behind us. Please pan in this way, please. Be careful of your baby. This is it.
That's the building coming down.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. No.
Fortunately, the building, with more than 40 floors, had been evacuated. But once again, the concrete canyons of Lower Manhattan were filled with the sounds of sirens and the sight of people fleeing for their lives. At 8:30, the president, now back in Washington, addressed the nation from the Oval Office.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors.
The president focused on America's strength as a nation.
Our military is powerful, and it's prepared.
He also issued this warning.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Tonight, search and rescue efforts continued at the Pentagon and in New York City, where the Twin Towers once stood, a hole in the skyline, an eerie glow, and the realization of just how much was lost on this terrible, terrible day.
Dayline Stone Films tonight with a comprehensive report on this long and difficult day in American history, a day without end, because in lower Manhattan and at the Pentagon tonight, they continue to look for people who may have survived this deadly attack. They're trying to find victims as well. Law enforcement fanning out around the world tonight. U.S. military forces on the highest state of alert. The Pentagon is now asking Army personnel who were assigned to the Pentagon today to call this number, 1-800-984-8523 or 703-428-0002. 428-0002. Families are also asked to call those numbers if they are still trying to locate a loved one. Navy and Marine personnel assigned to the Pentagon today should call this number, 1-877-663-6772. The Pentagon wants everyone to be aware of those numbers because they're trying to get an accurate count of the dead and missing in that 757 hijacked airliner attack on the Pentagon that was such a devastating blow to America's military headquarters. At least 800 people in the Pentagon alone were killed in that attack. I'm joined on the phone now by Tom Clancy, who is a real authority on American security, and of course one of the world's best-known authors of terrorist attacks in fictional form. He once wrote a book called Debt of Honor that ended with a 747 crashing into the U.S. Capitol. Tom, it turns out the truth is much stranger and much more devastating than fiction.
Well, Tom, it always is, and one of the problems with being a writer of fiction is keeping up with all the perversity of the real world. It's just a horrible event. And, it's all, we're talking over 10,000 American dead, and that's about as bad as it gets.
When you first heard these reports today of hijacked planes being flown into the Twin Trade Towers and into the Pentagon, what was your initial reaction?
I wouldn't have written this into a novel because I would not have regarded it as a credible threat. 4 people willing to give their lives up for their cause in a period of a few hours. That's not very. It's just hard to grasp. It's hard to wrap your mind around something like that.
Well, the other thing that we have to say is that this was a very efficient, in a cold-blooded fashion, and a very sophisticated and a very complex operation that didn't happen in just the last 48 hours or so.
Well, obviously, there were some months or weeks or months or potentially even years of preparation went into this. I mean, pardon me for putting it this way, but it was a beautifully planned operation. It just, as Pearl Harbor achieved tactical surprise and achieved the objective of the Japanese Navy, so this operation achieved the objective of its perpetrators.
We want to put on the screen now, Tom, and have you watch it at home as well. This is the tracking that we had earlier today of these airliners that took off from Boston's Logan Field. And as you can see, it was very shortly after takeoff that they make a hard left turn and head for New York Harbor and the World Trade Center. We were told that they were armed with knives, but this hijacking all happened very quickly.
Yeah, I'm looking at the radar track now. It's somewhat surprising that the air traffic control system wasn't alerted by this, but I don't know I'm not a pilot. I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Well, one of the things that happened apparently is that the hijackers were so sophisticated they knew to turn off the transponders. So they had this kind of a track on them, but they didn't have the radar track that they would normally have, or the radio traffic that they would have with the air traffic controllers.
Well, that'd be one explanation of it, I guess. But again, I'm not an airline pilot. I don't know the ins and outs of that system. I really can't comment on it intelligently.
You do know a lot about the perils that exist in the modern world and the high technology that is available to just about everyone out there. You think that there's a full appreciation, certainly there may be by the end of this day, a full appreciation across America, even in the highest echelons of our government and our corporate life, of the real threat of terrorism?
Well, certainly this event has brought things pretty close to home for everybody. I mean, we've got, again, more than 10,000 Americans have probably lost their lives today. And that's 10,000 families who have learned the hard way that terrorism is quite real.
give you any pause about writing additional fiction about terrorist attacks?
No, I have no such plans. But yeah, I'm not. You don't try to make money off things like that. It just isn't ethical.
All right, Tom Clancy, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Tom Clancy, of course, wrote, among other things, Debt of Honor, a fictional account of a terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol, hijack 747. Tom was using the number 10,000. That was his rough guess at this time. We have no indication that that many people have been killed. The numbers that are being used by New York City and federal authorities are simply that they do expect the death toll to be huge. Horrendous is another number. We think that there were thousands of people in the World Trade Center when it came down. This is Air Force One returning to Washington today with some company, F-16s flying escort to Air Force One. That likely will become standard operating procedure whenever the president travels domestically, and certainly it has been the case internationally. They put up a cap. They fly cover for him when he goes into Europe, whoever the president is, when Air Force One is in areas that they need to have some controls over. The president does have some major trips scheduled. He's going to be coming to New York to address the United Nations. He's also scheduled to go in October on a major Asian journey. He'll be going to Beijing for one of the most important meetings of his new presidency with President Jiang Zemin and the other Chinese leaders. There are real military and political and economic tensions between these two great powers, and there will be additional emphasis, obviously, on that trip with the president going there at that time. So I want to now share with you the experiences of Robert Harper, who was in the World Trade Center today when it was hit by a plane. We talked earlier today when he was at a hospital and he had been treated some. Mr. Harper, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. Thanks, Tom.
Tell us exactly where you were and what you were doing when the World Trade Center was attacked.
Yeah, I was outside of the World Trade Center at the point of the impact of the second airplane, and had only recently come into Manhattan. I was running a little bit late, as we had talked about earlier in one of the broadcasts, and I saw the second plane hit the building, and I couldn't believe it, because at first, my thought was, well, maybe it was just an accident, but then when you saw the second plane come in, it was clear, I think, to everyone that this was not a mistake. This was a clear, deliberate, malicious act, that was, perpetrated on the United States. And at that point, I just felt that, this was a very dangerous place to be. There had been a huge fireball that came quickly after that, and I knew that, it was a very dangerous place to have been today.
And so you began to run, I gather.
I did, and one of the things that I think the videos that you've shown tonight really don't reflect is that, by the time those buildings started to come down, there were so many thousands of people that were down there trying to help everyone out. There were, EMS workers, firemen down there, and the huge cloud of smoke. I think someone referred to it is looking as though it was snowing down there, and that's exactly what happened. I had to take my shirt off and put it over my nose to breathe, because all of the debris that was coming down there just made it impossible to even feel like, you were going to get out of there. And once the building started coming down, I was sort of over in the area near the Woolworth building, and I thought, this building comes down, it's probably going to hit the Woolworth building, and I began to run. I mean, literally just run, at the top speed that I could to try to get over to the bridges. But then I kept thinking, whoever did this, they perpetrated this particularly to try to maybe bring down some of the other buildings. So all of the thousands of people that were on the Brooklyn Bridge, I also felt were probably in danger, and you really had no idea which way to run, but you knew that you just had to get somewhere. So it was incredible, because I think that for the amount of people that have lost their lives today, it was just no way of knowing, what you could have done then.
Where did you work in the World Trade Center, Robert?
I wasn't working in the World Trade Center, but I work on William Street, a few blocks around there, but I'd come into the area and was down there then.
And what about your other co-workers? Are they okay tonight?
I hope so. I mean, as you know, the cell phones were operating off of the World Trade Center tower, so a lot of people I've lost contact with. I've tried to call a lot of people. Cell phones initially had been out of touch. I've left messages from people, and I'm just glad to hear that Mayor Giuliani has suggested that people don't come into Manhattan tomorrow, because it's been very difficult to get communication. I've tried to call to various members of my family, and they're saying that a lot of the lines have been tied up or not able to get through. So I would suspect that a lot of voicemails in that area probably are not operable now.
All right, thank you very much, Robert Harper, who had a narrow escape today. He was just a little bit late for work, and it was a good day to be that, probably.
Absolutely.
And he was able to get out of that area, but he was witness to many of the horrors that were existing down there. In fact, New York City is a much more personal city than a lot of people realize. It's really a collection of small towns. There are networks of friends and contacts all over New York City tonight. And so many people are talking to one another, because when you had a building like the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, 20,000 people, as many as 50,000 in some days, were working or passing through there. Someone almost everyone knows someone who worked there or worked near there. And tonight people are frantic trying to find out what happened to their friends. And then there are these terrible stories of cell calls being made from the Twin Trade Towers back to loved ones saying, "I don't think I'm going to get out of here, I love you." Or in one case, a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital was online with her husband when the line went dead. St. Vincent's was one of the major destinations for rescue workers today, and NBC's Robert Bazell has been there all day long. Robert, is a little bit quieter there tonight?
Yeah, it's quieted down quite a bit in the last few hours, Tom. I just got word that another person in the burn unit died of the injuries just a few minutes ago. In addition, 2 police officers were brought in. Many of the police officers today have had eye problems because there was just a storm of concrete dust down there, and a lot of the rescue workers had very severe problems with their eyes. Mayor Giuliani tried to get a lot more goggles taken down there at one point because there were so many eye injuries. But of course, that's not the worst of it. The multiple burn injuries and a lot of people that were crushed. And as we can't repeat it often enough, of all the people that did manage to make it in as casualties, an enormous number, maybe 1 in 5, were rescue workers, firefighters,